Does system matter? That's the premise for today's video. And because I can't just be simple, the answer is, of course, it depends. Mostly it depends on what you mean by system, however. I'm going to say that from what I usually think of system as being kind of the overarching framework of mechanics, I'm going to say no, system does not matter. But let me explain what I mean by that, because in other ways system does matter a very great deal. And let me do that by way of example. I was pretty big into D&D in the early 2000s when 3rd edition came out, as I probably mentioned here before. And I was kind of excited when Eberron was released, and I think Eberron's a very interesting setting that I like quite a bit. However, I don't think Eberron is a good D&D setting. And the reason for that is that Eberron bills itself as a game of swashbuckling pulp action, and the rules do not support that, because 3.5 edition, the rules that were in play at the time, was a game of cautious and tactical grid-based combat that was completely antithetical to swashbuckling pulp-like over-the-top action. So it simply did not facilitate what Eberron was trying to be. In many ways, Eberron was a Savage World setting trying to be a D&D setting. Now, I know that kind of sounds ridiculous because, of course, it was designed specifically for 3.5, but one of its core high concepts was that it was a game of over-the-top pulpish action and noir sensibilities, and it was supposed to feel cinematic and kind of like an action movie, and it didn't ever, because the system of 3.5 D&D did not allow it. However, it wouldn't have been hard to modify a few key elements of D&D to make it work. And I've in fact done so myself at times when I've run Eberron. I've increased the potency a great deal of action points, for example. I've played gridless and kind of changed a few key elements of how combat works, and those things kind of make it work for Eberron. So is that the system then? The system plus the house rules, or is the system by itself just the system? And so you see what I mean is that, you know, the basic overarching mechanical framework I don't think matters. You can get to the same place starting with D20, starting with a 5e base, starting with an OSR base, starting with a D100 BRP-like base, starting with GURPS, starting with Savage Worlds. Any of those systems can get you to the same place. So in that sense, system doesn't matter. Just pick one that you like and make sure that it works. Now, in the way the system does matter is the specific rules that you use to implement your setting and genre and conventions and tone do matter a great deal. And that's one of the biggest complaints that I've had about D&D from the very beginning, is that I don't actually like some of the specific implementations of some of what it does. I don't like the way that it does leveling and XP, that completely changes the genre from low level to mid level, and from mid level to upper mid or lower high or whatever you want to call it. And then it's, you know, you're playing Avengers or Justice League at high level. I don't like that that does it that way. I don't like the way that magic works in D&D. And I never have. I don't like clerical magic. I don't like insta-healing the way that clerics do it. I don't like the very mechanistic and transactional type of wizard spells. And I know D&D in many ways has tried to address this by coming up with alternative magic classes that work differently, or even alternative magic systems altogether. In 3.5, for example, they added the sorcerer, which played fairly differently than the wizard. And then they also added several other types of magic over time, including psionics, which really, let's face it, is just an alternate magic system. So there's a lot of things about D&D that I specifically don't like, but that doesn't mean that I think D&D is a bad system. I just think that those things need to be changed. So, for example, I consider my game to be a D&D. It is a spin-off of D&D. It kind of treads many of the same themes and tone as D&D. It uses very similar mechanics in many ways to D&D, at least older D&D. However, it also plays considerably differently. I have very different races. I have very truncated mechanics. They're very light and universal, and my magic system is completely redone, and it doesn't work anything at all like magic in D&D. And in fact, the basis of it was the magic from D20 Call of Cthulhu and one of the campaign models of D20 Modern, which was more of a darker kind of, I don't know, Buffy the Vampire the Slayer or supernatural type of magic system. And so by kind of combining those two elements together, kind of seeing how they worked, adding in other kind of things that felt right, I got to what I basically call Lovecraftian rather than Vancian magic, which is a different system altogether and works considerably differently. But in spite of that, I don't feel like it means my game is not D&D-like. I think, if anything, my game is not D&D-like in the sense that I keep it at relatively lower level and that I focus on a more espionage, noir, and almost horror tone while I'm playing. So it's kind of like if D&D were seen through the lens of The Godfather and Raymond Chandler and The X-Files and Dracula, rather than seen through a lens of Tolkien and Eddings and Terry Brooks and stuff like that. So I guess my point is I don't think it matters which basic system you modify, but it does matter how you modify it and how the specific implementation of it is. And you absolutely need to give a lot of thought into the specific implementation of a lot of different things. If your system, using that definition of system, doesn't match the genre, tone, and experience that you're going for, you're going to be fighting against the system. It's not going to give you the results you want, and you're going to be unhappy with it. So it does pay to pay attention to those kind of things. And if it means house ruling like crazy, well, so be it. You should absolutely feel free to do so, and you should feel free to house rule as much as you can, or as much as you need to, rather. I think house ruling is kind of a two-edged sword, because if you do too much house ruling, it can become cumbersome and complicated to actually run. And as my setting went through much of its development over the years, I gradually moved more and more away from using D&D as is to one that had a rather lengthy and complicated house rule document. And it became so bad, in fact, that I got really kind of frustrated with how cumbersome it was to use. And I didn't really like D20 that much anymore anyway, because I felt like it was just too cumbersome of a system. So I found an alternative that was much more rules light. That made it much more easy for me to house rule. So that's one of the reasons that I said I like rules light games, is because it's easy to house rule, and it's easy to kind of hack it into what you want it to be. Whereas the more cumbersome the system is, you can certainly do it, but it's, tracking all the things that are different than what's in print becomes a bit challenging. So anyway, that's kind of my talk on, does system matter? Yeah, and also no. It doesn't matter which system you use, but it does matter what you do with it and how you customize it and how you make sure that it fits the tone and the theme you're going for. And to make it easy on yourself, starting with a system that's already pretty close to the tone and genre and feel that you want is, of course, highly desirable, because it's much less work for you to then change it to make it fit. But I've been very impressed with many of these systems that have been used for multiple genres, multiple tones, multiple ways of playing and have done so successfully. D20 did it, Savage Worlds does it, GURPS does it, BRP does it. Lots of other systems have been adapted into multiple games and multiple genres with multiple tones, and because most of them all work fairly well, it seems to me rather self-evident that it doesn't matter which one you start with. Just like I said earlier, pick one that you like and stick with it. It'll make it easier for you in the long run. But it certainly does matter what you do with it. Anyway, next time.